Hi, good evening, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to those of you who are here in the room with us and those of you who are joining us virtually via Zoom. Before we begin, just a technical corona reminder. Everyone is required to keep their masks on throughout the evening unless you're addressing the group. Otherwise, please keep your masks on. My name is Elisa Grinberg. I live in Efrat. I'm the program coordinator of the Women's State Midrash at Efrat and Gush Etzion. We have programming in Hebrew and in English. There's materials outside which you can take a look at. And if anyone has questions about our programs, you can discuss with me at the end of the evening. Tonight's event is a culmination of a joint initiative and cooperative efforts. And we're very grateful to our partners in putting this together tonight. So Matnas Efrat, who serves as a center for Efrat's cultural events and community programs, and to the Efrat Moetzah's Olim department, that's over there. We look forward to working together on many more occasions serving the community. As Olim, some brand new, some veterans, it's very exciting to be able to connect to the land in this very real way and keeping the laws of Shmita. For tonight's program, we're honored to have three excellent educators joining us. All three are residents of Efrat, and each was handpicked for tonight's topic, and we're grateful to them for accepting the invitation and joining us. Our first speaker is Rabbi David Marcus. We'll be speaking about Hilchot Shmita in the kitchen. Rabbi Marcus is a Musmach of Yeshiva University and holds graduate degrees in psychology and education. He's been teaching in formal and informal education for the past 30 years. He was formerly the rabbi of the Young Israel of Lawrenceville, New Jersey, and a faculty member of the Touro College Psychology Department. He has served as the director of the Efrat Medical Center and the director general of the One Israel Fund Israel. He currently serves as the director of the Binyamin Medical Center and the author of several Torah publications, including the Shmita Guide, which you will receive this evening. Rabbi Marcus.
This is going to be an interesting experience because based on the camera position, I actually need to stand still. Not my typical style of speaking, but we'll do the best. All those people on camera, if I happen to move away, I apologize. Chazal present the classic question, Ma inyan Shmita etzel Har Sinai. This is something that appears in the Medrash on Parshat Behar when the Torah introduces the laws of Sinai. And Chazal used this as an excuse to be able to present to us, or to juxtapose the concept that Shmita represents the prototype of incredibly intricate details that are contained within mitzvot, arguing that the same way all the intricate small nuances and details of Shmita are given to us by Kadosh Baruch Hu in Har Sinai, so too all the mitzvahs of the Torah. Already presenting us the idea that Shmita is really, really, really complicated. It has a lot of details, and we have to learn how to be able to observe Shmita well, particularly because, as most of you, I assume, you're no different than I am, and that 7 years go by, and what was that again? And you have to start all over again because we just don't remember so well how to keep all of these details. But I would like to actually argue that Chazal were hinting towards another element to Shmita, which I think is the most fundamental variable to be able to keep Shmita properly. My inyan Shmita etzel Har Sinai. The experience of keeping Shmita is so unique because it gives us the opportunity to physically sense the presence of Kadosh Baruch Hu for an entire year, to embrace the presence of Kedusha in our lives. That's an incredible opportunity. In no different than we experienced when he stood in front of Kadosh Baruch Hu in Matan Torah, that's how he's supposed to feel the entire year. When you're living in Eretz Yisrael, on a land that its Kedusha is beaming out, finding its way into the fruit of Eretz Yisrael, and when we sit down to eat, every time we take a bite, we have the opportunity to take a bite out of something that is kadosh. That is an incredible opportunity, something that we should embrace, as scary as sometimes it might be when we learn how to do it properly. Okay. Now, in order to do this properly, I really do need to give a long-winded explanation of all the different types of ways that Shmita is being kept. But being that Rabbi Berman is going to entertain us in the third part segment of this evening and is going to talk about how to shop, he's going to go into the expanded version of what all these terms mean. I will only give a little bit of a snippet into the main concepts that you need to know because it affects the way you conduct yourself in your own kitchen. Let's start with a timeline. For those of you that picked up outside, there is actually a chart, which is a timeline in Hebrew, right? A timeline, which is put out by Machon Torah Art, which is excellent. And I want to just explain the concepts that are behind it because that's what's going to help you understand how to navigate your way through Shmita throughout the year. There are two variables that we need to know, and that's the difference between fruit and vegetables. A vegetable receives its kedusha from the minute that it's picked. So if I go out to the field and I pluck something off of a vegetable bush, that now has kedusha. Now, being that vegetables come to the market shortly after they're picked, so technically all vegetables already are in the category having kedushat shvi. Okay. Now, practically, it doesn't really work that way because it does take a while until the products that are picked actually show up in our stores, depending on the types of that and that you'll hear about later, and the issues of refrigeration and how that affects us. Fruit, however, go by what's called chanata. Chanata is the moment by which the flower falls, and you see the little ball of the fruit already on the tree. Okay, that is the moment that defines the calendar year that that fruit belongs to. Being that it goes by chanata, that means that all the fruit that will be in the market for the next few months all belong to the 6th year, not the 7th year. It's only later in the year where fruit had enough time to grow in the Shmita year in which they could receive kedusha. The idea of perot shishit, of products of shishit, is vital because you need to know when you're buying something, is it something from this year, something from last year? And you need to know in your home, if you go to your garden, what that means in terms of where, how you define this particular item. It becomes vitally important when it comes to vegetables. Vegetables have a tricky matter. We said already that it goes by lekita. However, Chazal inserted a very strict prohibition, particularly on vegetables, probably because they were Iber Chachams, you know what Iber Chachams, right? They were wise guys that would say, oh, well, you know, I used to have a cucumber field. I didn't do anything this year. The cucumbers just grew by themselves. It wasn't me, right? So in order to circumvent that, Chazal set a rule that's called Isur Sefichin. Isur Sefichin means all vegetables that are grown in Shmita itself are prohibited, period. You're not allowed to eat them. That makes it very difficult when you wind up with vegetables. Then you need to know exactly when they were grown and where they were grown. Okay, so when you talk about the shopping, these issues will be discussed. That said, that only applies to vegetables. A very, very important basic rule in Shmita is that regardless of how the fruit was treated, by who is treated, and how it arrived in your kitchen, it, according to most Rishonim, most of the poskim, not all, does not affect the actual fruit. In other words, even if someone was a total violator and he did all of the laws that are prohibited on Shmita and brought his fruit to your house, those fruit are still permissible. You are allowed to eat fruit that were not handled properly in Shmita. However, the fruit have kedusha. So you need to know that it's kadosh. Okay. The nature of kedusha. And I'm not discussing the hashkafic issue because that will take an hour onto itself of all the hashkafic issues of Shmita. But the practical aspect of kedushat shvi'it is very unique. One, it is kedusha that is permanent. There is nothing that you could do to eradicate the kedusha from the fruit itself. Once it's kadosh, it's kadosh. Okay, that stays even if you have something 10 years later. For example, a well-preserved wine, okay, that was grown in Shmita that has Kedusha, will always have that Kedusha. Two, it is a very contagious Kedusha. Contagious means it affects everything that it comes in contact with. So if I have a, let's say, carrots and onions that all have Kedushat Shvi'it, and I diced them all up and I threw them into my soup. Now I have a huge bowl of chicken soup. That entire bowl of chicken soup has Kedushat Shvi'it because anything that it mixes with gets Kadosh, including any money that is used to buy it. So money becomes Kadosh from the exchange of Perot Shvi. Okay. Classically, there are several options that we're going to meet in terms of when you look at the fruit that you're going to wind up with fruit in your house. Okay? The ultimate ideal is fruit that was handled in Kedusha from beginning to end, and therefore it is Kadosh from beginning to end. That is what we call Otzar Beitin, or something that's grown in your personal garden, obviously, if you just pick one. Okay? Otzar Beitin, I'm not going to go into the whole explanation, but it's basically a mechanism by which a Beitin actually hires a farmer to do all the work, and then the Beitin distributes it to the stores, and there are very specific stores, and Efrat is only one store that's carrying Otzar Haaretz, which is the store that's in the site. Everybody else is using the second option, which is Heter Mechira. Heter Mechira, without going into a whole explanation, but it is essentially similar to other types of Mechirot that we do to Goyim. The land is owned by a Goy, and therefore, what? Here's the tricky part. Okay, pay attention to this rule. The most difficult rule to sustain, and very important, and that is the Chazon Ish, who was the biggest opponent of the Heter Mechira, argued, why is Heter Mechira no good? Because the holiness of the fruit is not determined by who grows it. It's determined by the land. I don't care who owned the land and who grew it. If it grew in Eretz Yisrael, it's holy. Rav Kook, who is the biggest proponent of Heter Mechira, wrote on several occasions that yes, the Heter Mechira is necessary and it helps farmers in their conduct. Individuals who are purchasing Heter Mechira are to treat Heter Mechira as if it has Kedusha. Therefore, both Otzar Haaretz and Heter Mechira that is in your house should be treated as something that is Kadosh. Okay. You're going to have many other options, things that are imported, things that are grown in areas that are not Kadosh in Eretz Yisrael. All of that will be discussed later on, but those are the primary issues that you need to be concerned. How do we conduct ourselves in our kitchen in order to be able to sustain and treat properly the holiness that is now in our home? Okay, so first regulation is be normal. What does that mean, be normal? This is not a good year for creative culinary adventures. Essentially, you're supposed to treat Kedushat Shvi'it products in the way that you typically treat them, not you. The way is commonly treated. Okay? You're not doing a public survey. You're not doing a census. It doesn't have to reach a 51% majority. It just needs to be the common way that people prepare food. Okay? This changes. Last Shmita, it was very rare to find anyone that even knew what kale was, never mind took it and threw it into a shake. Now it's very common and popular. People have frozen fruit and make shakes all the time. So the way that we use the fruit changed. That's true for a lot of things that we do in our kitchen. You just have to try to be as normal as you can with the fruit and not to try to do creative things in general. It's disrespectful to the Kedusha. Spices have Kedushat Shvi'it. So if it is a spice that was grown in Eretz Yisrael, produced in Eretz Yisrael, it has Kedushat Shvi'it, you have to be careful with that. A side note is that Kedushat Shvi'it relates to the fruit not only when you intend to consume it. What does that mean? Well, as long as I am enjoying the product while I am using it, I'm allowed to use it for whatever I want. So let's say I have something that I only use for fragrance. It has Kedushat Shvit. I'm allowed to use it for fragrance if it decomposes while I'm using it. If I use potatoes for painting, or anything like that, or any other type of artistic use of food products that I enjoy, it is permissible to use Kedusha for that as long as my enjoyment is while I'm using it, not afterwards. For something that decomposes or burns and then I enjoy it later, that's not permissible. Okay. Rule of thumb, you're not supposed to waste anything. Didn't your mother tell you that? Okay. It's super important when it comes to Kedushat Shvi'it not to waste anything that has Kedusha. So you're supposed to try to finish all of your food, finish your plate properly, don't have leftovers. What are you going to do? Particularly when you are preparing the food, there is always leftovers. So how do we handle leftovers that have Kedusha? It is appropriate to have a bin in your kitchen that is not a garbage can. Well, it is, but we don't call it a garbage can because it's used for Kedusha products. Any leftovers that are still edible should be placed in this bin and allowed to decompose for a day or two until it's no longer edible. Then it could be wrapped up properly in a plastic bag and put in a regular garbage. Okay. Now, that means that you have to be respectful of the next batch of food that you're going to put in there. So if you put some food from breakfast into the bin and then you didn't come home until dinner and now you're about to put something else in there, what's in there already became kind of gross. So you're not supposed to put on directly onto it. So either you have plastic bags that you tie in each time or put a layer of plastic bag on top of it, whatever it is, you keep it in there for a day or two, depending on your level of sensitivity, and then you can put it in the garbage. What do you do when you have something really big like a pot of soup? Because everybody always has leftover chicken soup. What do you do with that? You can't put that in the bin. You can't flush it down the toilet. So how do you get around that? So the easy solution is just leave the pot on the counter overnight. Most people won't eat chicken soup that was left on the counter overnight. So the next morning already it can be thrown out regularly. Okay. You're cleaning up your dishes. You have leftover food on your dish. Okay. If it's something that people already played with on a plate and ate, that's usually not considered to be edible to most other people. So that doesn't have Kedushat Shvit anymore. It's okay to throw that out. If there are any real chunks of food that were left on the plate that have Kedusha, proper to put that in the bin. Okay. Pits and peels. Okay. It depends on what's commonly eaten. Pits usually are not eaten. Peels very often are eaten depending on the type of fruit or vegetable that it is. Also, we're not very good about being careful when we take off peels not to have actual flesh attached to the peels. So if it is edible or has edible remnants on it, you have to put it in the bin. If not, it go into the regular garbage. Okay. Children. What do we do with children? You return them. Correct. Right. Pick them up after the year of Shmita. In truth is, children are allowed to eat the way children eat. For them, that's normal. So even if they do weird things with their foods, they're allowed to do it, even if it has Kedusha. But again, you should try not to waste. We try to teach them. It's a great opportunity to teach them what Kedusha means and how Kedusha functions in their lives, and to be careful with their food. And then all of the other hashkafic, beautiful messages that Shmita has to teach us, which you could teach your children through that. However, baby food, you're allowed to make. You can make it in any way that you need to make it. And if there's leftovers for babies, it's okay. That's permissible. Animals, huge problem. Yes, if you have animals in your home, you need to know it is absolutely prohibited to take something that has Kedushat Shvit that was edible to human beings and give it to an animal, even after it's no longer edible. Therefore, best not to give things that have Kedushat Shvit unless they were in the first place intended for animal consumption to animals. How many minutes do I have? Who's keeping track of time here? At least I'm gonna, okay. 2 more minutes. Okay. There is a concept that we're not going to have to deal with now, and by the time you have to deal with it, you will probably forget about it. So it's good to read up on it, know about it now. You'll read up on it later on. It's called bi'ur. Bi'ur means once a particular product is no longer readily available in the fields, you cannot have in your home more than what you need for 3 meals of that product. Okay, let's say that's it, apple season's over. Okay, you know that in Israel, as opposed to the like other places that we may have come from, there actually are seasons to fruits. So they're not available all the time everywhere. So assuming that something is no longer available on the market, okay, then at that point, you have to take whatever you have in your home that is of an accumulated amount, and you have to nullify it. You actually take it outside with 2 other people. They're your witnesses, and you declare this product is hereby nullified. Okay? And then you go, look, and they look over there and you go, oh, look, I just won this. You're allowed to reacquire. Okay? Yes, you can reacquire it. However, you need to go through the motions of taking it out. Again, this is very common with wine. Wine, olive oil, those are kind of things that are things. Okay? Related to that, I mentioned that you could only use things as you enjoy them. Okay? What is the one single mitzvah that we are absolutely not allowed to enjoy? We only have one mitzvah like that. What? Well, in the context of a mitzvah that you would do, because you wouldn't do Shem and Amor, the extension for that would be Nerot Chanukah. You're not allowed to do Chanukah. Hence, you cannot use oil that has to be Shat Shvi'it for candle lighting. Interesting halakha. Same principle, right? Okay. Same thing when you're going to come around to Pesach and you're going to sit at the Seder table. If you have wine that has to be Shat Shvi'it, you're in trouble. Okay. No finger dipping, no wine spilling. Can't do any of that. You can't waste any of it. If you're making Havdalah on wine that has to be Shat Shvi'it, and you have that wonderful custom of sticking your fingers and putting it anywhere, no, you cannot do that with something that has to be Shat Shvi'it. Okay. Final comment. We are entering into an incredibly complicated year. And as all good things in Judaism, no one agrees on anything. And it's okay to disagree. But Hashem doesn't have Kedusha present when there isn't Ahavat Yisrael. Hatred, criticism, belittling chases away the Kedusha that we are blessed with. So be very, very careful in your conduct with your friends and your neighbors and your relatives. Be respectful of different opinions. Try as best as you can to use this as an opportunity of growth and as closeness and as enhancement of Kedusha, and stay away from arguing over things that do not need to be argued about. Do your best to keep Kedusha in your home, to make your home as holy as possible. And may we enjoy every single one of, not the 354 days, because we have a whole extra month this year because of a double Adar of Shmita, and may our homes become a source of holiness for Klal Yisrael.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Marcus. Our next speaker is Yaakov Wegline, who will discuss Hilchot Shmita in the garden. Yaakov Wegline is the founding principal of the Efrat Educational Farm. He has over 30 years of experience in both formal and informal education and ran a gardening business. And having made Aliyah in 1994, this is now his 4th Shmita. Yaakov?
The right angle. Well, very interesting. I've been sandwiched between 2 rabbis. So I'm going to, instead of doing a halachic, philosophical, I'm going to try to keep it as practical. And so we'll go straight to the point. It's really not that complicated. First of all, you know, in gardening, in Shmita, you can mow, you can prune, you can weed. You're not allowed to mow, prune, or weed. So really simple. So yeah, Shemitah's coming, and I'm going to start off right away with disagreeing with Rabbi Marcus. Shabbos is a lot more complicated than Shemitah. We just do it every week. Kashrus is much more complicated than Shemitah, but we do it all the time. It becomes automatic. This is really simple. It really is, with jokes aside. And I have to say, as farm principals, as educational farm principals, over the last 6 months or so, I've gotten the question I've learned to hate. What are you going to do on Shmita? A lot. We're going to have a lot of fun. There's a lot to do because really we're not that limited. Let's have a show of hands first of all. Who has a garden here? Some people, you can raise your hands. I'm not going to watch. Okay. Who has houseplants? Okay, very nice. Mirpeset, plants on the mirpeset. Okay, that's where we're going to get a little complicated. A lot of misinformation on that. In fact, let's start with that. Let's start with houseplants, and they're like Rabbi Marcus said, there are a lot of opinions. Everybody's going to do. The accepted rabbinic opinion in Efrat is that houseplants in the house, you can do anything. Anything. There are opinions that say you should avoid the midoraita and only focus on the Durabanan things. But the accepted opinion, and that's how we operate on the farm, is within a house, there's no Shemitah. It's quite simple. The only maybe question is if you're putting the pot directly on the floor, what's the floor made of? You go to ask the rabbi about that. Or you just put a plastic plate underneath and you solve that problem. But if it's in the house and there's a plastic plate, we're fine. There are a lot of people who think that matzah minutak, if it's separated from the ground, it's automatically okay. That's where the mirpesset gets into the problem. Matzah minutak, or not in the ground, is only half of the equation. Because like I said, it has to be in the house. Something that's on a mirpesset, in a pot, or hydroponics, aquaponics, you've heard all about this. If it's under the sky, if there are no walls, it's Shmita. Shmita still applies for those things. It might be Drabanan, but Shmita applies for those things. But in mirpesset, especially if someone's in an apartment building, mirpesset has walls, has a roof, then we're okay. The only thing we want to be careful with is that the plant doesn't droop over the ground, because that, or droop under the sky, as maybe. But once we get that out of the way, we get the simple thing of in the house. That's simple. Mirpesset, if you have a roof, you have walls, it counts as in the house. Greenhouses, if the floor is sealed, it's got permanent walls, permanent roof, we're in all good shape. So that's where we get in. I really have to move back because I'm a little too tall. Sorry about that, people on Zoom. So the real issue is gardening. And I'm actually going to skip to the end and connect a little bit to both the rabbis' talks. Who has fruit trees in their gardens? Anybody have vegetable gardens? Very few, but and they still have vegetables on their plants? Okay. So let's get some bad news out of the way. I don't know if you thought you could do it and you tried to do it, and there's no heter mechira in the garden. Heter mechira was designed for businessmen. In other words, farmers who that's their livelihood. It was to solve the problem of all the farmers who were going to starve because they couldn't earn any money, and maybe even for the population who wouldn't be able to buy, there would be no produce for them to buy during Shmita. But it's not designed for the private garden whatsoever. So for you, it's very simple. Your produce is hefker during Shmita. That means theoretically anybody can come in and pick. You're allowed to limit them. Best way is either on the community WhatsApp or a sign outside the house and say, yes, it's Shmita. My tomatoes are hefker. Please call me to let me know, to coordinate when you're going to pick it. Or you can pick on Fridays, Friday mornings between 8 and 10 a.m. Right? Like Rabbi Marcus said, the fruit is not till next year. The whole question of wine during Pesach or during for Havdalah, we're not dealing with that. We're making wine now for Tafshin Pei Aleph wine, because that was the fruit on the fruit is now on. It did the chanata. It started forming months ago. We're going to worry about that later. But the fruit on your trees will have the same deal coming on. These are the easy things. Let your neighbors. You always want neighbors. Usually, if you have an apple tree, fortunately, apples is more than you ever want. And you're begging people to Same thing here. It's hefker. More people might come in and do it. It's a lovely thing. But now let's get down to the real thing, is what can you do in your garden during Shmita? And here we have two terms that Chazal like to use that define for us what we're allowed to do and what we're not allowed to do. And a lot of it has to do with what goes on up here and what goes on over here. What we're thinking and what it looks like we're doing. As with a lot of halakha. We're worried about what the neighbors think, and we're worried about what the person is thinking and what his intentions are. But the two terms are le'ukme and le'ivruya. Le'ukme, lekayem, to maintain, and le'ivruya is to improve, to build it up, to make it better. And basically anything that we're doing to maintain, to make sure our plants don't die, that's good. As long as it looks like it's obvious by the way we're doing it, that we're doing it in order to prevent damage to the plants. And as long as we're not improving. So that is the intention. And I'm going to give a nice example as far as what it looks like and the intention. Really, I'm qualified for this because I'm not a rabbi, and the educational farm is a farm. Farming and gardening are two different things, but because of the because of the gardening business I had. Did a lot of studying back then in 2000, 2001. That's when the business was really at its height, and learned a lot about it. And I studied because I have a client who loves roses, and I planted from something like 50 rose bushes. I studied how to prune rose bushes properly. It's not that easy, and it hurts. But you have to go in and you have to get rid of the ones that are going the wrong way, and you get rid of the branches going this way, and you have to do it the right angle, this much. And one of the big things is when it flowers and you remove the stem with the flower or the dead flower, if you cut it the right way, you'll encourage a lot more growth and prettier flowers in a nicer shaped bush. Now, many of you might have rose bushes or other flowering bushes, and you're perfectly allowed to cut your flowers to bring them into the house for showers. But I can't cut the roses for showers, because when I do it, I automatically do it in a way that is obviously professional way of doing it, and I can't get myself to like hack away in any which way to get a flower off. So, especially when my kids were young and they haven't learned the right way, I sent them out to cut the roses for showers. And I make sure it's long enough, do whatever you pick, whatever you want. Everything's good, and that's what you have to do. It has to be obvious, and your intention is to get the flower and not to improve the growth of the bush. Another way, it's if we're already on pruning, that you're allowed to prune, and you are allowed to prune a lot of things. There are two other ways you're allowed to prune. One is the standard if it's blocking your way. In other words, if you've got branches covering the path, you're allowed to put those off. You're allowed to clear the path. And it's obvious when you're doing that, that's your goal. I did it today. On the farm, I was trying to put things into one of our machsanim, and the charuf tree had branches, they were in my face, and I pushed them aside. I'm like, what am I doing? I went out and got the clippers. I went, flipped away, knocked them down, and I was perfectly happy because I'm doing it the right way. This is what I'm allowed to do. The only regret I had was I wasn't waiting for students to be with me to show them that this is what we can do. We have paths, everybody's got paths, you can do it. The other thing that, the other way you're allowed to prune is if you got a nice hedge that's nice and neat and been maintained in a clear, I think Chaim Guggenheim is the one with the nicest one on Mitzvah Yerushalayim. I started that one, so I can brag about it. And so you can maintain that because when you're pruning that, it's very obvious. Nobody prunes their hedge because they want it to grow more, and they have a nice established hedge. They grow it, and they hope that they can turn off the switch so it stops growing and stays exactly that way. So you're doing it in order to maintain it. So that's as far as pruning goes. We're allowed to do it when we're picking something. We're allowed to, like flowers, we're allowed to do it when it's blocking our way, and we're allowed to do it when we're pruning the hedge, when we're making something nice and neat the way it was. That's good. What about mowing the grass? Yes, you're supposed to mow the grass. In fact, the more you mow it, the better. Because if you wait and the ends get brown, so all of a sudden you're trying to create new growth when you're cutting it, right? If you wait too long and it gets all, if you wait too long, you know, the grass gets really hard. And so then by cutting it, you're trying to get nice, soft blades coming up. That's no good. But if you cut every week and you just getting new fresh growth every week, and so it's maintaining the way it was, it's just like the hedge that we're having. The one thing I would warn about mowing the lawn, and we're going to come back to this with the weeding, is when I mow the lawn, I use a weed whacker, you know, the thing with the string on the end, and I go around, and when I'm done getting everything to a nice even height, I go on the edges, flip the wire on the side, and cut a nice clean edge around, nice and crisp. Anybody know what the problem with that is? Because when I'm doing it, I'm going over the dirt and I'm turning up the soil. Okay, one thing we know is that aerating the soil is very good for plants. It really, plants don't absorb water, they absorb moisture through the air pockets in the soil, mostly. So when you're aerating, they need more air pockets and they can absorb more water, and it's considered a real improvement. Which is really the reason why, as I said, we're going to get to weeding, you're not allowed to pull weeds out of the ground. Because pulling weeds out of the ground, the main thing you're doing is improving the soil around the weeds. Okay? So, but I said at the beginning in my stupid lame joke that you can weed. Right? How can you weed? Well, the best way is the most unenvironmental way possible to weed is to spray. Because you spray herbicide. The rabbis really prefer spraying because then you're limited and there are no accidents. Right, just like the accident about, oops, the cucumbers grew by themselves, and so they said no sfichim. Here too, when you're doing anything that you're actually touching the weeds, it's really hard. For someone who gardens regularly, when you see that weed, it really hurts not to pull that weed out of the ground. It's painful for me, and you should know on the farm I got 12 dunam there. There are a lot of weeds now. And it really, I have to stop myself every single day. Every time I walk, I have to put on a blindfold. But pulling weeds out, you're aerating the soil. And I'll just tell you something else if it just makes you happier. Who here weeds by pulling their weeds regularly, normally? Okay. There's a type of gardening that's called no-dig gardening, which recommends never pulling your weeds, because what you're often doing by pulling your weeds is you're aerating and improving the soil for seeds of weeds or little bits of weeds that remain behind, and makes the weeds grow better. And you're better off doing the middle ground type of weeding, which I'm about to say, instead of pulling them. And the middle ground is if for some reason you can't spray, and I don't judge what someone says is can't spray, and you're not allowed to pull, and these weeds right here are either blocking the path or they are damaging the plant next to it, so they're really overwhelming the plant next to it. So you take clippers and you cut the weeds. Okay, and that, according to no-dig gardening, is the best way to do it anyways all year round, every year. Okay, that's a type of gardening that I looked into, and it's a very interesting approach. And there we have it. So let me just quickly look, because I'm being told that I'm talking too much. No, okay, all right, very good. So yeah, basically I covered everything that I want. The main points, there's so much, really, we could all go on for hours. This is a lot to talk about. The difference in gardening is between the ukme and the uvre is very fine. To maintain or to improve is, again, a lot of what my intention is, and it's what other people see as what I'm doing, and that's what we have to keep in mind. The only things that you're not allowed to do at all. You can't do any form of planting. You can't do any form of planting or seeding. That you can't do. Pruning a vineyard is really bad. That's a really, really bad one. But again, if the grapevine is in your way, chop it off, but don't look at how you're doing it so you don't do it the right way. And so there's very little that you can't do. The question is how you do it and to do it the right way. And we should all have a bracha from this, just so you know, every year, Shmita is a bracha for vineyards. You mentioned wine a lot of times now. Often the Shmita wine is very good, but especially 2 years after Shmita, where people, where the farmers did not prune their vineyards the way they were supposed to in Shmita, 2 years after Shmita, every time it's excellent wine season. So keep that in mind for a couple of years down the road, and we should all have bracha. Question. Watering. Okay, watering is just like anything else. You're allowed to water in order to maintain so your plants don't die. You're not supposed to water to levels where you're improving the plants. Now, it's a fine line. It takes a lot of professional knowledge, but the idea is to try to keep the plants alive. And I'll add one more point that's very important. We talk about maintaining the plant or improving the plant. From what I've been saying, which is something that I hadn't understood in the past, maintaining the fruit is not something that's necessarily permissible. Your goal is to maintain the plants so that in future crops. But if you're seeing that the fruit is not doing well, you can't add more water if the plants are doing well. Okay. Yes. In many ways, especially if it's obvious to everybody by the way you're doing it. Yes. Yes. Last couple of questions. That really connects to what the Rabbanim spoke, and we'll speak about. The idea is that you're allowed to let things decompose on their own. You're not allowed to do anything by physically, actively. I've never heard that you have to clean up. That's with the issue of orla. If you have a tree that's in its first 3 years, you're not supposed to let that fruit decompose because that's getting benefit from the fruit that way. But Rabbi Marcus, there's nothing about that you have to prevent it from decomposing. The branches have no kedusha. Only the fruit, the herbs, and the flowers. When you pick flowers for Shabbat, those, according to many opinions, have kedusha to them, and so you should wait till they really are no longer pleasant to get rid of. But anything that's not has no kedusha to it whatsoever. Yeah. Composting. So when Rabbi Marcus said you take those little bags from and once it's ready to go in the garbage, you can either go in the garbage or into the compost. Either way. Well, if you have one set compost area, that's okay. As long as you're not making a little compost here and a little compost here and a little compost here under the bushes and everything like that. If you have one compost area, it's generally accepted. Yeah, you cannot spread it. You'll save it. You'll have it afterwards. Yeah. You cannot do that during Shmita. Absolutely not. But no, anything that's being done to improve the soil, you can't do. That's a type of permaculture, the lasagna. Yeah. Yes, within the as long as you're not spreading it around, you're allowed to maintain your compost and develop. Yes, absolutely. Okay. Any other questions? Last one, and then you can give out my contact information, and there are a lot of rabbis. If you can rake leaves on concrete, but not on dirt, because you're aerating the soil. So if you can pick them up carefully, but to use a rake would be I would venture is a problem. Yes. Again, schach has no kedusha. Just like the arba minim, the only one of the arba minim that has any kedusha is the etrog, which is next. Because all the etrogim for this year were picked already. That's a whole nother lecture all of its own. The etrog. Okay. Shana tova g'mar chatima tova.
Thank you very much, Yaakov. Okay, thank you. If anyone has any further questions, Yaakov is happy for me to pass on his contact information, so you can send me a message and I'll send you his information. Okay, 1 minute. We're just getting our technical setup here. Sorry, one more minute as we get this technical set up. Challenge of the hybrid. We have exactly 100 people. 100 people are on Zoom now. Okay, you can do it. I said Dover. Okay. Okay. Thank you. Okay, so our final speaker for tonight is Rav Todd Berman, also known as Rav Victor Berman, who will address grocery shopping and eating out during Shmita. Rabbi Berman is the Director of Institutional Advancement at Yeshivat Eretz Hatzvi. He's held numerous posts in education from high school level through adult education. A graduate of Columbia University and Harvard Graduate School, he learned at Yeshivat Har Etzion and received smicha from Yeshivat HaMivtar in Efrat. He founded Brandeis University's Jewish Learning Initiative on campus, and he served as the rabbinic advisory to the Orthodox community there. He was a ran at Madreshet Lindenbaum, where he also served as the dormitory ran. Rabbi Berman. So the way it's set up now, you can kind of stand here so that they'll be able to see the board and see you.
Oh, we know we go. I gotta go further back. Okay. Got it.
One second. Turn the angle of the board a little bit so that the people can see it.
I'm not trying to use the board.
Oh, okay.
We're taking masks off. I'm just so I guess everyone here is a little different in their approaches to what they do. I'm primarily a teacher, so I teach in yeshiva. So that's my experience. I'm gonna try and back up so you can see me a little bit. We're used to actually having plastic screens everywhere and having to shout and having no one hear you. I also like to have papers because of that. But to be honest with you, this year could be 2 minutes long. I'm supposed to discuss buying stuff in grocery stores and restaurants and whatnot. I realize it can be very quick because you should be buying a place that has good hashgacha. So just like all the rest of the other 6 years, we don't buy things unless they have hashgacha. In Chutz La'aretz, many of us are used to having hashgacha, more about meat. We're about going to Publix and buying apples or buying flour or whatever. But in Eretz Yisrael, Baruch Hashem, we have Shlomo Masrot and all kinds of things. Rav Lichtenstein, Zichrono Livracha, wrote a wonderful article on women's learning. And in the article, he laments, the topic was women learning Torah, and it was Kedarka B'Kodesh. He said they only have to learn those things which are applicable to them, which is basically most of Shas. But he said that he wishes that Jews in Eretz Yisrael had the same visceral reaction, the same sensitivity to Trumot and Masrot, that they have to eating non-kosher meat. He told someone, "Oh my gosh, the hot dog you're eating is not kosher." And they say also hot dog's not so good for you, but hot dog's not kosher. They would freak out. The same thing should be true in regards to fruit and its kedusha. I'm not going to tell you what you should buy and what you should not buy. That's your job. You decide the postage that you have or the mechanism that you normally use in order to get to purchase things. What I'm going to try and do is make you informed consumers. That's my goal. And I want to tell you a story. My wife's uncle Itchy used to live on Kibbutz Tzvi. And he once, I know some people might know Uncle Itchy, but Itchy Fuchs. But Uncle Itchy once said that people are very machmir and shmita on his dime. In other words, most of us are not, most of our experience in buying food products is simply going to the store and buying food products. We don't grow them. So because of that, we're a little distant, and many people can start doing pilpulim and saying, oh my gosh, we must bring this or not, without a sensitivity to the fact that it impacts the farmers in Eretz Yisrael. Part of building Eretz Yisrael is also to develop our agricultural production and our society in general. So where Shmita has a number of issues which are connected to pristine halachot, we could say, a sensitivity should be added as an added ingredient, perhaps. And when it comes to posting, we'll see their posting, we take this very seriously. Should be added a sensitivity to what it's doing to the agricultural production in the state of Israel. On a few of the pieces, I just want to review real quickly. We've done them, hopefully not over enough. Most posting hold this week's day is only an Yisur Rabbanan or Kedushah Rabbanan. That's going to have implications. If it was D'oraita, there are other realities that we have to deal with. And Heter Mechira, for instance, would be something that would be much less applicable. The primary malachot are with the land, which we've all just heard about. So I'm not going to review any of those, but just point out that if someone violates that, if there's a person who's violating it, the fruit might not be prohibited. As Ray Marcus, I think, said, if someone brought fruit to you, they grew inappropriately on Shmita, whatever they did, the fruit is not prohibited, the fruit, not talking vegetables, but the fruit is not prohibited. However, there is an issue of purchasing that fruit because you're bolstering someone who is doing Isurim. So you're not allowed to buy fruit for people who are not following Shmita. Yes, I don't want to move to a tangent. One of the that's why it was very important to have that sheet. There are many of these online. This one's very nice. This one's very nice from Machon Torah Aretz. I just signed up today. We'll talk about that in a few minutes because it goes by time periods. Kosherot, the Kosherot organization, if you look online, they put out a more expansive one with more complicated halachot. What? Oh, that was I'm so used to doing Zooms in a very different manner. I'm used to like sitting down and having kind of not having it on a Sunday. But in any event, Kosherot has a more expansive one. I like theirs better in certain ways, but it goes more according to the fruit. Machon Torah Aretz on their website, by the way, it's an excellent website with both Shirin and Makarot sheets, and they made life a lot easier. But there are a couple of things we have to relate to Kedusha, that produce, be it fruit or vegetable, gets Kedusha. And in regards to vegetables, Kedusha kicked in immediately with Rosh Hashanah for most vegetables, not all, but most. A lot of them are listed here. And there's another thing with Isser Sfichim, which was mentioned before. Isser Sfichim is that Chazal added a rabbinic prohibition on top of everything else to say we don't want farmers to grow things illegally and appropriately doing averot. So therefore, they'll come and say, well, we just found this fruit. The fruit was growing wildly. We didn't have anything to do with it. Therefore, they created a new sort of vegetables in general. Vegetables grew during Shmita. Not if they grew before. They grew during Shmita, then they get a sort of Shmita. You're not allowed to eat those as well, and that's going to have implications. There is a question on whether or not Sfichin applies to all vegetables that have a kodesh, meaning all vegetables that grew during the Shmita year. Be very careful. If a vegetable grew yesterday, I mean, they picked it today, so it has kedusha in theory. We'll talk about that, clarify it in a second. But it doesn't have an Isser Sfichin according to most posting. So it's not prohibited unless it grew anew. So if you had carrots, the carrots were growing last week, and you pick them today, they might have kedusha, but they're not a sort of eat. They're not prohibited to eat. However, if they started growing in 2 months, then there would be a sort of eat. Those charts all delineate when that would begin and whatnot. Yeah. Okay, just to be very clear. If a vegetable, we have this little carrot. You know, everyone's read the book, The Carrot Seed. You know, the carrot seed, is it going to grow up? Is it going to, the little kid plants a carrot. Is it going to grow? It's going to grow. If a carrot is growing before Rosh Hashanah, past Rosh Hashanah, if the carrot was already growing and it wasn't picked until today, after Rosh Hashanah, okay, it might have kedusha. We're going to clarify that. Let's assume it has kedusha. It has kedusha, but it's not permitted to eat. It's not a thermos species. Not prohibited. If the carrot was planted now, after Rosh Hashanah and started to grow, then it's a sur. All these things here on the chart, that's why the chart even has a footnote. The footnote, at least I mean a footnote, that you have, these things have kedusha, but they're not prohibited because they all were growing before 2 days ago. In regards to this issue, but we're going to try and clarify some of the oats are baked in and whatnot issues in 1 minute. Okay. It also, the prohibition doesn't apply to those areas which were not conquered by Am Yisrael when they came back from Babel. So therefore, in parts of the south of Israel, in the Arava, so parts of the southern part of the Arava, it also doesn't. It's just it does like camera. Okay.
And then this way they'll hear you better. They'll hear you better on the
Okay.
Zoom as well.
Fine.
You put the earpiece in. The bottom, the leg of the earpiece is a microphone. So it's angled towards your mouth, and then you'll be able to hear you.
Okay, I wasn't loud enough. Okay, fine. Okay.
Another important issue in regard to Trumot Uma'asrot, and this is going to impact what happens when we buy things. In regards to Trumot Uma'asrot, if land belongs to a non-Jew in Eretz Yisrael, so all those fields that we see around us, according to most poskim, you don't take Trumot Uma'asrot from that produce. If the Arab grew it, brought it to market, and you bought it, there's no reason to take Trumot Uma'asrot. If, however, the Arab grew it but allowed Jews to come collect it, then indeed, according to many, and most poskim, it would have to take Trumot Uma'asrot. Okay, so that's an important piece. And one last introduction before I really get to the point I want to make is, right, Marcus mentioned that the kedusha, if you're buying produce which has kedusha, we're going to clarify that in a minute. If you buy produce which has kedusha, oats are baked in. So you go to Makolet and Zayt, and you buy oats are baked in produce, and it'll be labeled oats are baked in. So if you buy that with the money, you take out a 10 shekel bill, that 10 shekel becomes kadosh. Now, that's okay if you're dealing with a person in a market who is a religious individual, because he'll take that money and make sure he uses it for things, for other food or whatnot. He'll be careful with that money. The produce, so let's say you bought oats are baked in, kadosh, they have kedusha apples in 6 months, 7, 8 months, whatever it is. In 8 months, you buy apples with 10 shekel. The 10 shekel then becomes kodesh. The apples are also still kodesh, okay? The 10 shekel, though, you can transfer the kedusha from that 10 shekel to something else. The reason this is very important and becomes very complicated, but I'm going to try and make it simple, because it's very complicated, is if you're dealing with people in markets who are not necessarily shomer mitzvot, you have a complexity that you're giving them money that has kedusha, and they're not going to be careful with it. One way to get around that would be perhaps to use a credit card. If you buy things with credit cards, there's a little complication with this, but in general, there's a posting hold. If you use a credit card, there's nothing for the kedusha to fall onto, because the money is imaginary, as we all know, because we rack up very large credit card bills on Amazon, right? Another way is what the Bakod and Zayt is doing, is Otar Aretz. What they're doing is they have an app, and when you want to buy produce, you pay for it electronically. So electronically also, there's just like electrons going through, cables or whatever. There's nothing for the kedusha to grab onto. So I actually downloaded the app today. You go to the store in Zayt, you plug in their number, and you plug in the amount of fruit you want, and click the button, and then you get the fruit, and there's no money exchanged. Okay, let's talk about, you go to a store. What are you going to buy? Now I gave you out this little sheet. This little sheet is a hybrid of 3 different poskim. It's primarily based on Rabbi Yosef Rimon, who I happen to enjoy working with, and asked him Shilas, and a few others. So I want to go over the different positions. Now, if you go to like one of the major websites, Kosherot, they list these different, they all have the same thing, basically seven different ways where you can get the food from. And the 7 ways you can purchase food that was this way, that way, the other way. and they all have different orders of priority, what they think is the best. I'll talk about that. I'll clarify that. But that's why it comes very complicated. When I was in yeshiva, so it was a big thing, Ocher Beitin is the best thing in the world, and and it's still, Rav Rimon holds that way, and Kosher Road and others hold that way. And then I see Rav Malamed, Pin Halacha, thinks Ocher Beitin is one of the worst things. We'll talk about why in a second. So let's go through them. I did not put them in a prioritized order, and we'll talk about the kind of like the three different groups that are marketing. And so, when you go into a store, you go into a restaurant, you're going to look for a hechsher from that company or that group who they're going to follow. I noticed that today, when researching this, I noticed that a couple of years ago, I guess it started, but they just made a big announcement that the Hasidim and the Misnagdim got together and created a unified hashgacha. It's a new thing. I don't know much about it. A unified hashgacha, and the Emelon hashgacha is the Chazon Ish, and I saw they got a bracha from Ruchai Knesset. So basically, it's the Misnagdim. It's Misnagdim's hechsher, and they're declaring that all the Hasidim are following them as well. I don't know. We'll talk about the different hashgachot and how they apply here. Let's start from the far right. One thing that's not on here, actually, number 7. I'll start with number 7 because I'm going to go that way. Foreign imports. If you get Cheerios, Cheerios are only manufactured in one place, only manufactured in the United States of America, unlike many other cereals which come from England or whatever. Cheerios are manufactured in Minnesota, and that's it, right? So Cheerios have no kedusha. Okay, that's it. You buy a Cheerio box, it's not a problem. They're not a problem. There's no kedusha. Of course, one of the issues is you're buying stuff that's from outside of Israel, of course, and so that's the tension there. What about produce that's produced by non-Jews? In other words, the Arab farmers, be they in the West Bank, be they in, I don't know, wherever they are. You have Arab farmers who own the land. Without getting into some complexity in the post-game about are we short their land, did they steal the land, did they not steal land, et cetera, let's assume they own the land. If they own the land, then if you buy the produce that came from that land, it says right here, there's no kedushat that produce. By the way, by and large, this is a Haredi hashgachot, generally rely on one of these two and a couple other possibilities also are baked in. Okay. The issue, of course, is many people are against that because you're not supporting Israeli farmers and it's detrimental to the Jewish production in the country. Let's go to Oter Beitin. Oter Beitin has a halakhic source. It has a Tosefta which supports it. Interesting enough, it does not appear in the Bible. The Yerushalmi. What's Oter Beitin? Oter Beitin is, according to Tosefta, you're not allowed to work the land. You're not allowed to work the land. The land's supposed to be left for everybody to go collect the food. So if you have an orchard, I'll use apples again. You have an apple orchard, right? And you just have to make it hefker. You have to ownerless, and anyone can come and eat it. Rav Rimon, I know so one of his shirim mentioned, interesting enough, it doesn't mean that your kids don't have to ask the neighbor about going into the yard. Still, they have to ask the neighbor about going into the yard. If you have apple trees in your yard, you should allow people to come in there, and you'll see people put up signs that say, this is anyone can come and pick. But it doesn't mean that someone can just run rancid over your yard, not worry about your dog, and my dog would eat them. So that's like an issue. But in any event, the Beit Din, however, hires farmers and so listen, you have fields, you have apples, and you're not allowed to sell the apples because they're hefker. But in order for them to get to market, there's no way everyone's going to be able to come and get the apples from your orchard. So we, the Beit Din, are going to organize a system where farmers can go pick the apples. They'll use non-Jews for any Torah prohibition. They'll allow Jews for rabbinic prohibitions. For our purposes, doesn't matter. And they pick the apples. They then bring them to market. When you buy them, you're paying not for the apples, but for the labor that went into the apples. That is how Otor Aretz works. That's how the Makolet in Zayit following that. That's one of the major ways. They also follow other things as well, but that's one of the major ways that they get produce. That produce has kedusha and everything that Marcus earlier spoke about in the kitchen. You have to take into consideration, according to everybody, Otor Beit Din produce has kedusha. So that's wrong. The reason Rav Melamed has problems with it is it's a very complicated, both emotional, intellectual leap to tell farmers, hey, look, you're picking, it's just the labor, it's not actually the produce. It's also complicated because we're dealing with produce with real kedusha, and that's loaded with complexity that not everyone is good at. So he and several other poskim feel that that might actually be putting a stumbling block in front of the blind. You're telling people go pick this stuff, as it were, as if you're only doing the labor, but really we know you're not doing that. That's why he's against it. Other poskim think that's the best. You're supporting Israeli farmers on the one hand, and you're still maintaining the kedusha on the other, and you can really celebrate Shmita appropriately. That's why rabbis like Rav Rimon and others are in support of Otzar from Yaakov Ariel. A number of major post-Eretz Yisrael favor that, but that's one of the differences. Yeah.
I was wondering, how does the retailer justify making a profit?
Same thing, if they have control, that's why Otzar Aretz controls them, right? So they have to sell it. They can't sell the produce per se. They're supposed to be selling, also passing on the cost. So Otzar Aretz, for instance, what Otzar Aretz does is they're going to go to the market and they're going to say, we're going to control paying you, and you're getting paid from us, not the consumer, right? So that's what's happening. Another issue, let's say you're buying Kodesh produce, like Otzar Aretz, someone's not very careful with. So you can purchase it. You can purchase the produce either, as I said, by credit card, or you can purchase the produce with something else. Let's take lulav and etrog, which the etrogim won't be an issue until next year's etrogim. These etrogim were already picked. Again, I'll quote Uncle Itchy. Remember this? He told you about not making. And people like to make etrog jelly. Understand that on Tirat Tzvi, where they collect etrogim, they pull the etrogim straight off the tree. You know what the next thing they do? Put it in pesticide. They soak it in pesticide. Then they take it out of pesticide. You know what they do? They soak it in shellac. Okay? And they do that once a week, every week until it makes it to market. They're not sold as edibles. They don't have any of the requirements for food level production. You should not be eating etrogim that you're buying for lulav and etrog. But nonetheless, lulav and etrog is a fruit. Etrog costs 100 shekel. A lulav costs 100 shekel. If you pay 100 shekel for the etrog, you have a problem because you're buying something that kedusha. What you can do is say to the seller, I'm buying a 200 shekel lulav, beautiful lulav, super straight as all the hidurim. I'm buying a 200 shekel lulav. Do me a favor, kick in an etrog for free. And indeed, we'll see the Otzar Beit Din. They'll be selling the sets, and you're really paying for the other pieces, and you're getting this either for free or through the Otzar Beit Din mechanism. Okay, so that's a way that they can prevent it. Either you're paying for something else and that's being tossed in, or it's being controlled by the Beit Din, only making sure everyone gets labor, because the marketer also has labor, right? So you're paying him for labor. Fine. Again, so many, that's the preferable way with many post-game. And again, as you saw, Rav Melamed is against that. And within the Haredi world, I know they have their own Otzar Beit Din. One of the problems is it's extremely limited. It's complicated. It's limited produce. It's just, in general, I don't think it's up to the ability to spread enough for all of Israel. Yeah.
If we're paying only for the labor, how do we reconcile varying quality, grades of quality? You have a high level Sug Aleph apples and Sug Bet apples.
Yeah, so that's why the etrogim are sold in sealed boxes. The whole sealed box thing developed, right now you can still buy them in sealed boxes, that developed out of Otzar Beit Din.
I mean, for fruit, you're buying your fruit. You could have high quality stuff, you could have low quality stuff. The Rosen and Rami Levy, let's say they're both Otzar Beit Din.
Right, so in theory, they're not supposed to distinguish. It doesn't take more labor to pick a poor quality apple and a more expensive quality apple, so they try and balance it out. You understand why Melamed is scared about this, because does it really work? But those who advocate for it say, well, they'll work it out, and the Otzar Aretz people all are very careful with how they distribute the funding. Let's talk about go to greenhouses. Once upon a time, when we had our issue in Gush Katif had many of the pluses in regards to avoiding kedusha. One is it's not an area that was conquered by the Am Yisrael that came back from Bavel. And number two, they grew a lot of stuff in greenhouses and whatnot. How much time? I know this is like a long, in theory, I'm supposed to be done. I'll finish this line. Yofi. Okay. So, okay. Yeah, no problem. Okay, so the greenhouses, there's two pieces that work together. Now the greenhouse is in the south. One, it has to be inside a greenhouse, not connected to but also not connected to the ground. And so it has to not only be enclosed on top, it has to be enclosed on the bottom, and that's what they do. There's no kedusha. Many poskim hold those require true masrot without a bracha. Again, if you're buying with a proper hechsher, like tenuva, whatever, you can expect that that's going to be taken care of. Araval, really fast. Araval, we kind of mentioned. If you're buying it from there, that's buying it produce that's in a place that doesn't really have kedusha. Plus, they go by heter mechira. They sell the land to Arabs, so therefore they say it's okay. Let me explain one thing about heter mechira. The question is, most poskim seem to agree that if the land really 100% bona fide belongs to a non-Jew, then it doesn't have kedusha. Not everybody agrees with that, but most poskim agree with that. What about the heter mechira? Now we know we do other types of sales. So we do sale of chametz. Also, it is Torah, very serious Isser Torah. And okay, Shmita, we're only dealing with an Isser to Rabbanan. So there are those who feel that the original way that heter mechira was set up a few generations before of Cook, actually, the heter mechira was always controversial. Can you really sell land? Number one, it's a sort of sell the land. So how can you sell the land? There are different ways they get around that. It's only selling it for a period of time, etc. It's actually to build Eretz Yisrael because it enables farmers to make money, etc. So there's a tension if you're even allowed to do it. There's a tension if this sale will mafkia kedusha. Can it really break the kedusha or not? I'm going to disagree with Marcus a little bit on one thing that he said, but that's okay. So we're allowed to disagree. The question is if you buy produce through heter mechira, does it have kedusha or does it not have kedusha? If it has kedusha, then it shouldn't require true masrot because it's really non-kedusha produce. If it has kedusha, it shouldn't require true masrot. If it doesn't have kedusha, it does require true masrot. Since the people doing heter mechira do require taking of true masrot, so it would seem like the people who are enabling the heter mechira, the rabbanut, does feel primarily that it doesn't have kedusha. What's the difference for you? If you go to a common store, let's say my daughter who lives in Ashdod says, Shmita only exists in Gush Etzion. So what does that mean? So she lives in Ashdod, there's a Haredi community and there's other community. The Haredi community, they all either buy from non-Jews or buy it from a 60-year produce, or they buy it from outside of Eretz Yisrael. So because of that, their produce doesn't have kedusha, right? So they don't have to worry about it primarily unless like they want to buy smoked or baked and stuff, but that's the primary distribution of their food. The majority of stores in Israel that distribute through Tenuva, all say true to Maser. In fact, a number of years ago, the conservative movement in Israel wanted to get rid of Shmita altogether. So at Kibbutz Hanaton, they approached the conservative rabbinate and said, do we have to keep Shmita? They said, no, you don't keep Shmita today. Leave one patch fallow. The rest you could just, forget Shmita doesn't exist for you. So they did that. And Tenuva said, great, we're not buying your produce. Right? Tenuva said, we can't because we can't sell it. So therefore, they end up selling the Hanaton as well. The produce, therefore, most stores are selling heter mechira produce. Some people argue you should treat it with extra kedusha. You should treat it as if it's kodesh and just assume that, the heter kind of works. In fact, on the Kosher Rote website, they're very disparaging of it. And they said, heter kishmo kan hu. It's simply like, a unpalatable leniency that really shouldn't rely on. Again, I was really shocked from Malabin. Pnei Halacha disagrees completely and says, no, this is the best way. It seems to fulfill the tension between helping the farmers and also keeping the halacha. Do you want to treat it with kedusha or not? That's up to you. Let me just reiterate another couple of points, and we'll conclude. So I'm trying to be very clear. it's critical if you go to a restaurant or you go to a grocery store, you'll look at the hashgacha. So there's no one, you have to decide, do I want to rely on heter mechira? Do I want to rely on Oter Beit Din? Do I want to rely on buying produce from the Arab sector, which by and large, much of the produce, cucumbers and stuff like that, we do during the other 6 years anyway. Do I want to rely on that? And you have to make those decisions. But the critical thing about the consumer is the hashgachot should label those. So you'll go in, I saw my friends send me a picture from Rami Levy, where Rami Levy already, many things are labeled. I was in another grocery store in front, it wasn't labeled yet, but it said, what's 6th year and what has Kedusha already, because it was however they got it. It had things, or Heter Mechira, it had things labeled. So that's a personal decision that you have to make. And just be reliant on those hashgachot and know what you're doing. Now, the tension here, the one thing I was going to use the board for, around 10 for, is you have these like kind of 3 major groups approaching the halacha. You have the Haredi community, which is trying to go for things without Kedusha. You have, I would say, a sect of the Datilu Mi community who is saying, let's go for Oter Beit Din, let's develop the Kedusha, but make sure that we support the farmers in Eretz Yisrael. And then you have other rabbis like Malamed who say, no, Heter Mechira, which the Rabbanut supported, is critical. If you go to a restaurant, and the restaurant is Mahadran, all the Mahadran Hashgachot do not rely on Heter Mechira. In fact, I just checked the Rabbanut Yerushalayim.
Every Tuda has, whether it's plus, it has what it's selling to Shmita.
Right.
It has both of them.
Oh, so okay, so the Rabbanut Yerushalayim announced they would not, all their,
It will be the same as well. All the $2 have.
right, they have to have that, right?
No,
Because
they have as well. Heter Mechira, Oter Beit Din, or things.
but you have to know which one's which.
They will have it written down on the $2.
Right. So if you go to a restaurant, the problem with the restaurants is that they don't necessarily, if you go to a restaurant, which at least Rabbanut Yerushalayim Mahadran, so Rabbanut Yerushalayim announced that they are not going to allow any Heter Mechira produce in their Mahadran Hashgacha. In the regular Hashgacha, they will rely, and you don't know what you're getting necessarily, because they don't tell you on the menu everything on this, in this omelet with peppers and tomatoes, exactly which one came from. So that's one issue, is that the regular hashgachot are all going to rely on, or most likely rely on Heter Mechira. I don't think most of them, but you could ask, be a wise consumer and ask if they have any Oter Beit Din, but most likely it will not be Oter Beit Din, in which case most likely will not have Kedusha, if without Kedusha. Yeah, Harot?
Saying in the bush, under the Rabbanut, the bush at Sion, nearly everybody is Yavul Nofri. There are a few that it says Heter Mechira. In Efrat, it's the other way around. Heter Mechira, most of them, and very few Yavul Nofri.
Right, and then the Zayid is Oter Beit Din, what they can get. Oter Beit Din, Shishit, and whatever. They're
not organized properly.
Got it. Okay. So that's like a sikum of like the decisions you have to make as an educated consumer. And if in Gush Etzion they label everything, I know the grocery store in the front in Dekel was not labeled.
It is getting done. It just hasn't.
Yeah, it wasn't labeled today. Right. Okay, but it wasn't labeled today, and I went in there and got rolls. And I noticed I checked the produce; it wasn't labeled. Good. Okay, and Rabbi Levi it already is. Okay, so I think that's a general sikum of some very complex topics. Yeah.
You can't be lazy and throw out peels from Hotel Beit Din with the Arab apples, right? Like, you're not really sure, just like
Right. Okay, fine. Can you throw out Oter Beit Din and Arava produce? So if it's something with Kedusha and something without Kedusha, no, you should not throw them out together. I was discussing this with Rav Rimon in regards to, there are a few things. There's the approach of the garbage can, have a separate garbage can for Kedusha. He suggested 10 hours, that every 10 hours you should put a piece of paper on top, like you put, I don't know, whatever peels are, and after 10 hours, put a piece of paper and you put more peels and 10 hours, and then eventually throw it out. You can also just throw it out. if you separate the stuff and put it into a plastic bag that doesn't have holes in it, then you can tie it up and throw it out or whatnot. In which case, yeah, you have a problem if you have things which are a mixture. So then that's exactly Rav Malamad's point. It's like, when you're doing it, it becomes incredibly complicated. Yeah.
I don't quite get the issue we're talking about restaurants. You go to a restaurant and you order an omelet that's got vegetables in it.
Yeah.
You can eat it.
I didn't say you couldn't eat it.
Well, what's the problem? I mean,
So,
I don't
so the
understand.
Rabbinut Yerushalayim, they suggest that if you go to a Rabbinut Yerushalayim Mahadran, I'm only telling Rabbinut Yerushalayim, this is what they posted on their website. Rabbinut Yerushalayim Mahadran, they said that they will not use, they're not going to use any produce which is heter mechira, and everything is going to be primarily shishit and yuval nachri and whatever. So that's all the same type. But they said in their regular Rabbinut Yerushalayim hashgachot, you could have a mixture of sources of the vegetables. That's what they pointed out. That they were asked that question. They said, yeah, we're allowing a mixture of sources. All the sources are kosher at the source, of course, because they're under hashgacha, but they're not telling you they're separate out. So you could have dominated by heter mechira, but you could have something else as well. So they're suggesting if you want to go to a regular Yerushalayim restaurant, you should know that you're eating heter mechira, which is totally fine, right? If that's the decision they make, and that's all. You don't know which sources are which. They're not being strict on this.
Is that the issue?
No, the issue is you don't know those sources. So you eat heter mechira. Let's say you're a person who wants to treat heter mechira with kedusha, and many people do. Many people don't, but many people do. And you want to treat heter mechira with kedusha, but they also have things that were grown last year. Shishit. So you go into a restaurant now, and they have vegetables that were picked this week. They have vegetables from last week. So there, in your omelet, you're going to have both those vegetables. And if you don't eat all those vegetables, then you have a problem throwing them out, right? Because you're going to have a mixture of vegetables that have kedusha and vegetables that don't have kedusha. Of course, that's according to your predilection. If you treat heter mechira with kedusha, then that would be the problem that you would cover. That's all Rabbi Yerushalayim suggested.
About the problem if some of it is not finished, and then what happens?
I think I want to talk about one other thing. I'll stop here, and I'm happy to choose afterward. When the Rabbinut started their hashgacha, they were confronted, in general, not Shmita, hashgacha in general, they were confronted with a dilemma, which honestly historically is the dilemma of Eastern versus Central Europe in regards to 19th century Judaism. The complexity is do we try and go for the quote unquote strictest standards possible, limiting the amount of people who can have access to that? People don't want to sacrifice those standards too bad. Or should we go for the broadest consensus standard, as much as possible, the broadest standard, enabling as many people as possible to keep kosher? So they went with the latter. Let's have everyone keep at least a minimal kosher standard, as many people as possible who want to, the army and whatnot. And then those people who don't feel they want to rely on this position after the other position, they'll create another standard. So that same complexity crops up in regards to the Shmita issues, as well as all issues, right? But that complexity is how the entire approach to kashrut. Honestly, I don't have time now, but that's really the fight of Germany versus Eastern European Orthodoxy. Yeah.
How would someone decide if they want to treat or not?
Well, they're different positions, right? So, like many things, there's some poskim who say that it does, and some poskim who say that it does not. So, who do you follow? So that's going to, the best thing is aseh l'charav. It's find a rabbi that you trust and get advice from that rabbi. That's what I would highly suggest, and you have to. That's the only way to do it. The restaurant's going to follow this. I'm assuming that they are upright people, which I have no reason to doubt anyone without evidence. They're going to follow the hashgacha that they're under, that's that. And many, again, like Sohar, I tried to find this on Shmita. They didn't, but I didn't see it yet. I looked all over and I was trying to contact them. But in regards to other things, you'll go see their tudot, like the tudot you mentioned about Shmita. Their tudot in general has a very long list of positions that this restaurant follows. this rabbi follows X, Y, Z, PDQ, whatever. These positions in halacha, and some people feel that is the positions they follow. Other people say, well, no, I follow this tradition that doesn't follow that. So the best thing is to have a rabbi you can consult with and say, how do you think I should approach Kedushat Shvid in regards to Heter Mechira? That's like most things, I think. Yeah.
What about eating at friends' houses? Friends who you generally consider as kosher and acceptable to you, okay? Well, in terms of Shmita, they have different standards. They're more machmir or less machmir.
Do you really want to hear my position on this?
Yeah.
What I tell my students, in regard, remember Shmita, and people quote me on this, but be that as it may. Shmita is Kedusha D'Rabbanan today. Malbim Pnei Chavero, embarrassing someone, is an Isur Torah. I personally think that Beit Amel Chavero, people need to be very machmir about, because the Torah mitzvah. That means you have to think about if you have friends that are very comfortable. I think good friends will say, well, what do you feel comfortable with? Will you come over and eat this or not? So then you have to navigate that way. And say, but every person's going to know that personal dynamic and their friends and whatever. But I tell my students when they ask me this question, I say always lean towards being machmir on embarrassing people. And I think Rabbi Marcus mentioned, I think beautifully, that Shmita is supposed to create a certain, ahavat Yisrael. Kashrut has a danger. Kashrut, all kinds of psychological reasons as well, but kashrut has a real danger of creating divides. And I think that's a super dangerous thing. And I personally have a certain standard in my home that me and my kids follow. And I go to restaurants, it's a standard I'd follow. But if I go to other people's houses, we're not talking about they're serving me something which is bona fide, not kosher, right? We're not talking about someone serving you something which is not proper shita or something. But they're relying on leniency. I personally rely on the leniency. But that's a predilection that people are going to have about themselves. But that's how I tell my students. Okay, we're good. Okay. Oh yeah.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Berman, and thank you to all of you for joining us tonight. And it was really meaningful and important. So thank you to our speakers, and thank you to those who joined us here and those who joined us on Zoom. It's been a good year for all of us. Okay, I gotta shut the recording.
My daughter did